Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Um, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Christos Passas. I'm a director of Zaha Hadid Architects, and I'm here to speak to you about my manifesto called Restart Toward a New Technological, Eco-Technological Habitat. Um, in, um, in recent times, um, the COVID-19 pandemic has created a new situation in which we find ourselves in. And the starting slide of my presentation here today is to show one very interesting event that took place in Athens, Greece, in May. This is a demonstration or a coming together of different people who come to basically commemorate the May Day in front of the country's parliament. And what's interesting about this is that such a demonstration is usually seen as a place of mess, of hustle and bustle. And what we have witnessed here is that during the COVID-19 pandemic, even these kinds of events begin to get reorganized with social distancing into a new kind of situation. And what is interesting is that we're now beginning to see ourselves for the first time as a species, as a place with our place in the world, and we begin to understand collectively how these events are beginning to affect us. So part of my engagement here is really to begin to see how cities are beginning to be transformed. What do we need to do in these circumstances, and how we can also realign our trajectories and our objectives, our intentions, both in the architecture, the infrastructure, and the construction world, and to be able to find those new approaches that will enable us to deal with the kind of world that we are living in today. So the first typology in my presentation is called the free spaces. And free spaces are the places where people are coming together, and they're usually free to move, free to operate in different kinds of ways, such as in public piazzas, etc. And here, I would like to show you a kind of an aerial view of the city of Nicosia in a little island of Cyprus, which is subdivided between two communities, and the Turkish and the Greek community, and the Venetian wall, a medieval fortification that, as you can see, circumvents the old city of Nicosia, is divided between the two communities. Our proposal in this particular case was to develop a project, but also through the project to instigate a sort of architectural activism for the reunification of this moat around the Venetian fortification, and thus creating a free space that can be appropriated by people of both communities as a civic free space. And in essence, our approach in architectural terms takes the shape of a big white plaza that is floating over the particular moat, and actually becomes a place of congregation, but also a place of transition through for the people of this town. So the idea of free space becomes an interesting model for the reinvigoration of urban territories by introducing both greenery and landscape, but also civic articulations into the urban domain, so that it can become much more designed and much more appropriated toward the diversity of functions in cities. And this is the intervention. As you can see, the site that extends from against the Venetian wall makes an intentional attempt to recognize the archaeological monument, while at the same time it does come through as an articulation of a mutant project, of a hybrid project that is both architectural and landscaping at the same time. And for me, this is one of the ways through which we can begin to interact with our spaces, but also a means or a method through which we can begin to combine architectural and landscaping techniques together. This second project I would like to show you is a project competition we've done for one of our clients in Moscow. It's a project on a very busy site that neighbors a highway and also a train station and also a complex of buildings on the back of our building. And the program was quite dense because it required a number of facilities such as a business and a cultural center, but also a number of other complementary facilities, such as an auditorium for 1,600 people, a school of medicine, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, a train transportation hub, some destination restaurants, etc. So what we came up with was the idea of building the building as a shelf and allowing ourselves to explore the position of this particular site as a way to, in a way, show how the building can become part of the city and the city can become part of the building. So the idea here was to create a number of systems. The shelving system, which is the horizontal floors, are connected by a series of crossing escalators that you can see on this drawing, while at the same time, all the cultural program gets installed within these fluid, bubbly shaped spaces. And in this way, we develop mechanisms to separate what is the cultural from what is the business program, while at the same time, we propose the idea of having, again, a certain amount of free spaces within what would otherwise be a private building, and using the occasion of erecting this building to create a series of public spaces and public gardens and terraces that would actually come into existence as the people begin to use them for public rather than private functions. So the space between these two buildings becomes also a very important interstitial space, a space where the movement of people from the bank, from the business institutions, but also from the cultural components of this building begin to come together in a new type of city that shares these free space. At the same time, the ecological approach to our buildings becomes more and more important. The strangeness of the architectural proposition becomes explained through the bioclimatic approaches that we're, for example, begin to explore in this particular building. This particular building is a proposition for the School of Biological Sciences in a university. And what this program holds is a number of laboratories for biological and other scientific research. But at the same time, because the climate in this particular place is so hot, especially during the summer, we developed a series of canopies which are covering the building at the very top that become at once columns, but also flues or chimneys for the biological laboratories to be able to be ventilated passively by the simple flow of air in a very similar way than a chimney in a fireplace works. However, in this case, it is also interesting to observe that these canopies that are built out of fabric can also provide a lot of shading for the spaces below, therefore reducing the thermal heat gain of the project, and in that sense also provides a very nicely shaded piazza for the students of the university to be able to meander around. So we believe that there are novel architectonic ways how to be using bioclimatic concerns to still create interesting architectural propositions that can have both a sustainable angle to them, but also a beautiful architectural outlook. The third approach that I would like to introduce is through a project that we've done in Belgrade in Serbia a few years ago. And in this case, we concerned ourselves quite a lot with this idea of a bionic constellation, meaning the fusion of architectural and landscape design into one whole. And of course, in this particular case, because the program was so complex, it had a number of residences, a business center, a shopping mall, an existing hotel that needed to be renovated. We wanted to bring this whole community within one integrated whole, and what better way to enrich this otherwise urban mixed-use environment with a series of gardens and landscape terraces that allow people to enjoy on their day-to-day life. And what we've learned from here is that planning these two things together can open up new possibilities for architectural expression, but also landscape integration into these otherwise large and in many cases dry mixed-use developments. So this idea of developing bionic architectural propositions can also be extrapolated in this idea of 3D cities, meaning constellations of urban projects that are coming together not as a singular use or as a kind of layered mixed-use program starting from the street level, but actually by introducing a number of sky bridges, the program can now become a lot more interestingly developed. So in those bridges, one can see retail expanded inside, so people can go shopping without really exiting the complex in which they live, using some of the terraces of the volumes to be able to create sky parks on top of the different areas, but also using horizontal program to be able to bring through a number of other functions, such as business functions, such as public concentrations, but also using the general landscape around them for recreation, for promenades, etc. So the idea of creating these 3D cities forces us to begin to explore how we can reorganize architectural compositions so that they don't exclusively take the ground as a basis, but we can create multiple grounds across different levels to be able to create horizontal public movement through buildings to enhance circulation and also to differentiate by a large degree the program that happens inside them. Talking about this kind of bionic architecture, we do need to see the purpose of them, and one desired outcome is always this kind of the new vitality. So in many cases nowadays, we're being asked to integrate natural landscapes together with technology. And this makes a very, very interesting proposition because, what's interesting about this is that the development of technology seems to be going hand in hand with our increased understanding about ecological considerations. And the more one moves the more our thinking moves in one direction, it also seems to be moving in another direction as well. So what I would like to propose is that we bring these two aspects together and we fuse them into a new kind of landscape, a new kind of ecology or ecosystem that allows human beings to be within and live within it, but at the same time to also for human beings to have the opportunity to be stewards and managers of these ecosystems, protectors of these ecosystems. In this particular case, this new innovation area in China was developed as a series of high-tech campuses that are embedded within the hillsides of this valley. Our approach was to divert one of the nearby rivers and flood the valley in the middle so that we can create areas of recreation, but also areas where the buildings could be cooled during their cycle, and at the same time enhance the greenery around it. And of course, there is a lot of information that one needs to absorb in a relatively short amount of time to understand what this environment is all about, etc. So when we went there, we took as much information about this site as we could from the client and other government organizations, and we analyzed these slopes and these hills so that we can understand what the topology could give us as opportunities for development. And within that, we inserted these underground or submerged into the ground campuses for big data analysis centers, for artificial intelligence and robotics factories, and green and smart automobile research centers. So each one of these clusters is an economy or a kind of a research institute by itself, while at the same time, the landscape is ever present around them. So by beginning to understand things in such a way and using digital techniques to be able to analyze these highly complex ecosystems, we can begin to think about embedding architecture in a productive way within the landscape without destroying the landscape and also without affecting its life cycle, throughout the year. So the whole point of this is to rediscover the romantic qualities of the natural landscape, while at the same time allowing development to happen, but to happen in a much more sensitive and in a much more sensible way as we go forward. So one can see these landscapes as romantic landscapes, like a kind of a sort of English garden type landscape approach, but at the same time, it can be highly technological. It can use smart systems to move people around, and also smart and novel construction techniques to be able to build what may be interesting and complex architectural forms that reflect the the necessities of contemporary life and industry. At the same time, we are beginning to learn that coastal areas have serious risks in terms of the rising of the water levels, but not only that, which is more frequently in the media, there is also other issues in coastal cities, such as high winds and other environmental conditions that need to be negotiated with when somebody plans a development on the seashore. In this case, in an area in southern Russia, in a city called Novorossiysk, we were asked to develop a 10-year master plan for the development of a series of buildings that would sit by the shore. And the municipality wanted to create a system of growth that would allow them to grow the project over a period of time and create a project that was also recognizable enough to be an attractor for business tourism into this port city. So we came up with the idea to create a system that was based on a series of buildings as fragments that would constellate together to create new mixed-use programs. So each one of these volumes is either a residential building and a hotel and a conference center or a museum or a retail zone or an art gallery, so that every time one of these projects was built, it would grow the offering in the particular area. And at the same time, you will see that, you know, the promenade conditions are now becoming possible in this very, very windy town, because these buildings are beginning to create windshield effects that allows territories within this master plan to be easily used without people being blown away, while at the same time, each of the building enjoys views to the bay, to this beautiful bay, you know, on most of the rooms that each one of them houses. Another coastal approach that we're proposing here as a kind of a method and as an example is in this case in Dubrovnik in Croatia, where the building becomes part of the natural formation of the landscape. And in this sense, it becomes almost like a mask sitting in front of the cliffside. And by using this approach, we're beginning to explore the possibilities to revisit this kind of very rough and raw rocky formation from the inside of the hotel. And at the same time, we can begin to create cantilevering terraces that open up new possibilities for bungalows, luxury bungalows, but also for passages for the public and also for the guests of this hotel to be able to enjoy in a kind of a new transformational approach to this cliffside. And this is what the project looks like. So it's a cliffhanger. It's almost something that hangs off of the cliff. So we're not afraid to approach certain elements this way. And as you can see, the building is very nicely embedded within the natural landscape here. So talking about recreation, talking about mixed-use buildings, etc., what happens in the workplace? The image I showed you in the beginning with the kind of the demonstration in the Syntagma Square in Athens is one example. But before this whole COVID pandemic started, we were very much engaged in redefining workspaces and to move away from either the open or the closed plan office, and instead produce paradigms and architectural geometries that would enable us to create privacy and openness in the same spaces. So what we're looking at is a series of diversified new generation office spaces where people can have different degrees of privacy or enclosure versus openness or social interaction. And as you can see in this diagram at the bottom of the page, the social, the collaborative, the isolated or enclosed or the open spaces are all coexisting inside the same domain. And what that allows us to do is to begin to look at office spaces as ecosystems of human activity with different needs. And in that sense, also become much more efficient and potent places for companies to be able to constantly reorganize. Here we are seeing, for example, two possibilities for how to furnish the office spaces, but of course there is a myriad other possibilities to organize these floor plates in a way that they always reflect the busyness and also the kinds of projects and tasks that a company has to work with in parallel. So the building looks again rather strange, but it is based on this idea of the circular agglomerations, bringing circular spaces together. Each circle corresponds to one project team, and therefore all the different project teams coming together, they by themselves then create these interconnected ecologies between one another. And of course, here the ultimate aim is to create a company that engage the spaces of a company that engages its employees by showing and having an open door policy, as it were, to what is happening within the whole company so that everybody can see the overall activity. The building itself features some large atria. These open voids basically allow the users of this building to be able to see through the building, to be able to get an overview of what the whole company is doing, and in that way also enhances navigation, orientation through the building, but also the engagement with the company as a whole. One more project that I would like to show is these ideas that I've spoken about so far, but in this case as an urbanistic project, a large approach, a bionic urbanism approach, the so-called ecotech habitats, where we're beginning to combine technology and ecological considerations to begin to see how these new cities can become much more appropriate for the type of knowledge about the environment, but also the type of knowledge we're developing on a technological level. So these cities are all about human beings. What we spend a lot of time thinking about is how, you know, a group of people, some of these people belong to a family, like the 4 people at the top is the father, the mother, the child, and the grandfather. They all live in the same city. So how do we make the lives of these people meaningful? Well, one way is to create cities and urban centers that are able to facilitate different lifestyles, different points of view, different activities, different interests, but at the same time to provide growth, to provide a feeling that people investing in this kind of new habitats by living their lives there, I don't mean investment in money, but I mean investment in time and commitment, means that they are all coming together to create a kind of a new reality. And of course, all these lives coming together can give rise to all sorts of other projects. And here, for example, in some cases, ecotech habitats that we presented in different ways. They can be in different parts of the world and in different landscapes, where whether in the desert or in the sea or on the mountain or in the valleys, they can always become feasible if we begin to look at those two components together. So in this short amount of time that we had together, I hope that I conveyed some of these messages to you clearly, and I thank you for your attention.